So we're back for episode 3, and having hit rock bottom last time, it's nowhere to go but up, right? And we're going to Moat Cailin. Interesting. I figured we'd be done with those plots. So we start out at the House of Black and White, and here we have the Weeping Woman, and here we have the Lion of Night, and then we have R'hllor. Interesting. He's a death god? And then we have a Werewood Face, a death god as well, and the Drown god. I definitely didn't see that coming. I mean, the Ironborn see the sea as a giver of life, don't they? So Jaqen H'ghar helps some guy commit suicide, and then Arya comes up and complains that she's been sweeping for days, which is funny because it feels like I've been watching her for days. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tommen gets married. Did no Lannisters come to the wedding? I mean, Cersei is standing next to Pycelle. She hates Pycelle. That must have been the worst reception for her. And Tommen loses his virginity, and maybe Margaery does too. This is an interesting little scene. Obviously noble ladies are pretty careful about keeping their hymens intact, and yet Margaery goes through this scene like it's no big deal. So either she got out of the examination, or she's been having non-vaginal sex. Tommen laments his brother for a second, which is pretty interesting. We know very little about the Joffrey-Tommen relationship. I'm sure it wasn't good, but it would be interesting to know how abusive Joffrey was. Margaery wastes no time and goes right into scheming to try to get Cersei out of town. And Cersei sees Tommen's ploy coming from 1,000,000 miles away. This is followed up by some more fake smiles from Margaery. This is interesting because Cersei is already batshit insane. And she has this prophecy to worry about, and she has Qyburn messing with her head. In the books, the innocence of Margaery is an open question. Cersei might just be paranoid. But here, Margaery is clearly scheming. Meanwhile in Winterfell, they finally got Theon to look a little haggard. Good job, makeup guys. Hey, it's Bloodraven, or maybe it's Bran. Ooh, they said he wasn't going to appear this season. Meanwhile at Winterfell, Ramsay is busy being all screwed up, and you know he's screwed up because he's eating. Now Roose talks about how he doesn't have any armies up north and that he's worried. But I wonder, where are the Freys? Didn't he marry Fat Walda? Still, he feels like he needs a marriage for Ramsay. So we're gonna have Jane Poole dressed up like Arya and... Uh-oh. Oh no. No, this doesn't make sense. Is Sansa going to pretend to be her own little sister? Because that would be kind of interesting. But this is just a straightforward marriage. So let me go over Littlefinger's plan. Step 1. Spend nearly 20 years romancing Lysa Tully. Step 2. Have Lysa land you a gig as Master of Coin. Step 3. Convince Lysa to kill her husband. Step 4. Pit the Lannisters against the Starks by blaming Jon Arryn's death, Bran's attack, Sir Hugh's death, global warming, the JFK assassination, and anything else on the Lannisters in order to make Ned paranoid. Step 5. When Ned organizes a coup, pretend you have his back and then betray him. While you're at it, have his head cut off. Step 6. Use your established trust with the Lannisters to arrange an alliance and marriage between the Tyrells and the Lannisters. Step 7. Get Harrenhal as a reward and use the new station to marry Lysa. Step 8. During the Tyrell Lannister marriage, poison the king and kidnap Sansa, the heir to the north. Step 9. Kill Lysa to gain full control of Sweet Robin, the Lord of the Vale. And Step 10? Fuck it. Just give your wards away. It's not like you put any effort into getting them. Even Sansa thinks this is ridiculous, but Littlefinger gives her some line about how she's still a Stark even though she's dyed her hair. Which is a rather peculiar line considering it's the Starks that have the dark hair. Sansa gets her red hair from the Tully side of the family. Meanwhile, Pod and Brienne are watching from above, and they decide they better ride around Moat Cailin. That's right, ride around Moat Cailin. I guess it was completely not important that the Ironborn took Moat Cailin, or that Theon was betraying his own people to get it back for the Boltons. The Boltons could have ridden around it the whole time. And in the next scene we learn about Brienne's love for Renly, although it's only platonic in the show, because platonic love is so much more compelling. Meanwhile on the wall, Jon rejects Stannis' offer to become Lord of Winterfell. Now if you remember, a couple seasons back, the show fucked up by having Jon discover that Bran was still alive. When that happened, I wondered how Jon was going to deal with Stannis' offer. After all, Jon wouldn't want to steal Winterfell from his brothers. And now we see how the show dealt with it. They completely ignored it. Jon has forgotten his brothers. This is rather significant as Roose Bolton is trying to marry Sansa to Ramsay. At any point, Jon could just say to Stannis, "Hey, did you know that my brothers are still alive?" That completely nullifies the Boltons' claim to the north, doesn't it? I bet that's really useful political information. Anyway, Stannis and Jon have a love fest. Why don't you guys just kiss already? And I'm calling this one now. This kid, whoever he is, he's totally going to betray Jon. And then Davos has to reaffirm the fact that Stannis has a crush on Jon, even though we just totally saw that. Meanwhile, back in Braavos, we have the other girl at the House of Black and White kick Arya's butt. Was HBO scared of showing a man-on-girl butt-kicking? By the way, Arya was this close to murdering that girl. So Arya has to throw away her stuff, and she hides her sword here. I'm sorry, but some fisherman on his lunch break tomorrow is totally going to find that sword. And then we get 2 minutes and 40 seconds of sweeping and washing. Wow. Hey, it's Fat Walda. Now in this scene, Sansa meets Roose. Roose greets Sansa by saying, "Lady Sansa." But don't you think it would have been much more interesting had Sansa approached him and he said, "Lady Arya"? And then there's Ramsay's girlfriend. Who knows where this is going, but I'm sure we'll see her boobs again. So Sansa gets shown her room, and some old lady says, "The North remembers." The North remembers what? That Sansa likes lemon cakes? I'm sure when things go down, you'll be kicking some ass, Grandma. Meanwhile, back at the wall, Janis Slynt mouths off and gets his head cut off. What goes around comes around. That's what you get for killing Ned. Meanwhile, back with gratuitous TNA, the High Septon is trying to get his groove on. He picks the Maiden and the Stranger. I would have totally gone with the Smith. The High Septon then runs to the Small Council, and I will grant that Qyburn has some pretty good comic timing. I laughed out loud at Qyburn's "it doesn't matter." Cersei pays a visit to the High Sparrow and proves that she's pretty ballsy. She tells him that the High Septon is already in a dungeon. How does she know that the High Sparrow would be cool with her? I mean, there's a good chance that Lancel told him about their affair. Bold move, Cersei. Bold move. Meanwhile, back at Winterfell, Theon is shoveling horse crap. By the way, what's Theon's job? I mean, earlier he was serving food, and now he's shoveling horse crap. I mean, if I were a High Lord, I wouldn't want the guy that shovels horse crap to be serving my food. And now we get this scene between Littlefinger and Ramsay, where maybe we can figure out Littlefinger's plan. I mean, why on earth would Littlefinger take Sansa, the most special girl in the universe, and marry her off to an absolute monster? And we find out that Littlefinger doesn't know that Ramsay's a monster. Littlefinger is clueless about him. This is almost worse. Littlefinger didn't do any research? He just assumed that Roose Bolton's son would somehow be normal? And in the next scene, Roose tells Littlefinger that they've had a rider from the Eyrie. I guess the Eyrie is out of ravens? Over in Essos, we learn that different slaves have different tattoos, and their tattoos correspond to their occupation. How on earth is this helpful? I mean, I can understand if a tattoo delineates the owner. Cattle branding has a function. But why delineate an occupation? I mean, imagine if your dung shoveler suddenly gets injured and you want to switch him to a different job. Or maybe your bed slave gets old and you want to switch her to, say, sewing. I'm not sure if there's any advantages to delineating one's occupation with a tattoo. So rather than Benerro or Moqorro, we seem to have this girl as a prophet for the Red God. I wonder if she's going to be showing up again, or how she's going to get to Meereen. Later at the whorehouse, we see a whore dressed up like Daenerys, and sadly, she's not on Jorah's lap. And it's too bad. Jorah is such a holier-than-thou jerk. Him partaking in a Daenerys fetish fantasy endeared me to him. But I guess they wanted to keep him noble, stiff, and boring. Now this scene just doesn't make sense to me at all. A girl who's essentially a model is claiming that she never gets chosen because everybody's choosing Daenerys. My ass that prostitute wouldn't get chosen. But then Tyrion, because he's a special kind of guy, sees her beauty, he picks her, but then he just can't go through with it. I'm sorry, has Tyrion been replaced with a pod person? I'm sorry, are we supposed to think that Tyrion's a good guy now, even though he just recently strangled his girlfriend and killed his dad? And in the end, Tyrion gets captured by Jorah. You know, they really lost the element of surprise here. Had they cut the scene earlier with Jorah, which didn't really provide us anything, they would have really shocked the viewer. Ah, well. Well, that's episode 3. I guess I'll see you next week in episode 4.